Everyone wants to maximize their tax return, but unfortunately, as an accountant, I see people fall into the same mistakes every year. The good thing, these mistakes are easy to fix. The first one is filing the return way too early. People are in a rush to get their return done, and I fully understand that, especially if you're someone that gets a large refund. With the pressures of the current cost of living, I understand that people are going to want to get their refunds as soon as they can. But lodging early before your information is ready causes more issues for you. You really need to wait until you've got all of your information ready before you lodge your return. So for most people, that's going to be their employment income. And what you're looking for is it turning to tax ready. So if you go into your MyGov account, it'll normally say year to date figures, and then it will flick to tax ready once your employer has finalized those figures for the year. And that is a trigger point to know, yes, I can use these figures in my tax return and know that they are the finalized figures for the year. The reason you want to wait for this is that until then, they aren't finalized. Maybe there's some issues that have gone on in their back end and the figures aren't right. You can't rely on them until they're tax ready. Unfortunately, if you lodge before it's tax ready, it could change and therefore you could end up having to do an amendment. If you end up going down the path of having to do an amendment, you're either going to waste time on this doing it yourself. The ATO could send you an automatic amendment, which normally is then going to result in you owing tax, or you're going to have to go back to your tax agent. They're going to have to do an amendment and potentially charge you again for the service. So at the end of the day, it's going to cost you more to get an amendment done. The other issue that those that go out and rush, and especially those that super rush and go and do it on the 1st of July, the ATO don't actually start processing returns to normally about the 2nd week of July. Typically, refunds start flowing around that 10th of July. So doing it on 1st of July isn't going to get you the money any quicker. You're better off to wait those few days, wait for things to become tax ready, make sure you've checked over everything, you've done everything you can to maximize your return, including watching my how to maximize your tax return video, and then lodge your return. That way you know you're not going to have an amendment because you've included everything correctly the first time. The ATO are actually pretty generous when it comes to due dates. So here are their due dates. So for most people, you're going to fall under the 31st of October bracket if you're lodging yourself. And if you're going through a tax agent, you likely won't need to lodge until the 15th of May. So you've got plenty of time to get your information correct. The second common mistake I see people make is misclaiming deductions. I talk about this all the time on my channel. The easiest way to maximize your return is to claim all of your deductions. In fact, I talk about it so often, maybe I should put it on a t-shirt. Because you need to claim everything you're entitled to claim in order to maximize your tax return. It sounds like a common thing, and people probably ask the question, well, wouldn't everyone do that? And it normally comes down to two issues. People either have poor record keeping or they have poor memory, and therefore they don't claim everything they're entitled to. Now, the easiest way to fix this is to have a system to capture all of your data, capture all of your receipts, capture all of your expenses, so that you have them recorded so that when you lodge your tax return, you're not trying to rely on your memory to remember everything that's happened through the year. Instead, you've got a list there of what you can claim. So use some kind of system. I've talked about it before, but you can use something electronic such as Dropbox or Google Drive, or maybe it's the ATO My Deductions app. Put them in a folder, have them in a shoebox. Find a way that you can capture all your receipts in an organized manner, so therefore when you're doing your return, it's simply a matter of taking that list, putting it into the return, and therefore you can be confident that everything has been claimed that you're entitled to claim. The third mistake is people that just copy and paste from the prior year. And this is something in particular the ATO have said, do not do this, especially in areas that have changed like home office. You don't want to just copy what you did last year and put it into the return. Now, last year's return is a great starting point. In fact, when I do clients' returns, where do I start from? Last year's return, because it gives me a basis to go, what did we claim previously? Does that still apply this year? But that is the key of asking that question, does it still apply this year? Because it might not. And the chances are, with the cost of living going up, you might be doing yourself a disservice by using last year's figures, because the chances are a lot of your expenses have gone up. Things like insurances and memberships and maybe even your tax agent fees have gone up. So therefore you want to make sure you're claiming what you actually paid, not using last year's figures that could be less. So you really want to go through it and make sure you checked off what you claimed last year. Did you actually have that event happen again this year? Remove what didn't happen and then you add in what was new for this year. This is especially true for those areas that have undergone changes such as home office expenses and car expenses. Really make sure you dig deep into these two sections to make sure you're getting it right based on the current tax laws. The fourth common mistake I see is forgetting to include all of your income. You want to include all of your income when you lodge your return. There's no point deliberately forgetting things that you know the ATO are going to pick up on, because it's just going to result in an amendment later on and you owing money back. Now, people do quite often forget about bank interest or dividends, or maybe it's that job you work for a week for the year, or maybe it's that little small business you've got or your rental property. you need to include all of these things in your tax return. The ATO's data matching abilities are getting better and better, so they're going to pick up on things that you miss. And this is especially true for things like interest and dividends. They know these things exist, they get the data directly to them, and therefore you want to make sure you're including that in your tax return when you lodge. What happens if you don't do this is the ATO will likely actually send you a letter and say, hey, we know you've missed these things. Unless you can show us otherwise, we'll be automatically amending your return. And all of a sudden now you've got a tax debt. So there's no point getting $1,000 back if really all you're entitled to is $800, because now you're going to owe the ATO $200, plus potentially more if it's fines and interest that apply if they've deemed you've deliberately misled them. We also then have the issue, like we talked about earlier on in this video, that if now you've got to go back to your tax agent and go, I forgot to include these, can you guys add this in? Potentially you're going to get charged for this service. Or if you're doing your return yourself, you've now got to go back in, spend more of your valuable time redoing your return because you didn't get it right to start with. And it's very similar to what we talked about earlier in the video. Get your return right the first time so that becomes the only time. You don't need to redo it later on. If you're looking for more information about how you can make sure you do get your tax return right the first time and how it is maximized to make sure you're getting the most out of it, this upcoming video I've got is my How to Maximize Your Tax Return 2023 edition video. It's always one of my most popular videos on this channel, so I'd love for you to go and check that one out.